Hey, it's Mo Egger. Do you love college basketball as much as I do? Then you will love Long Necks. They've got a great TV setup with 4K TVs all over the place, and the sound is always on for the big games. The beer selection is terrific, and if you tried Long Necks wings, you owe it to yourself. 3 locations in Northern Kentucky, each one of them very easy to get to: Wilder, Hebron, and Richwood. And keep in mind, when the weather gets warmer, each Long Necks location has an awesome outdoor setup. Long Neck Sports Grill. Stay late, come often. Something we've done almost every single week is chat with one of the experts at OrthoCincy. OrthoCincy Orthopedics and Sports Medicine. The great thing about these folks, they've got specialists and locations all across the tri-state with walk-in orthopedic urgent care weekdays from 9 to 9, Saturdays from 9 to 1. You can learn more at OrthoCincy.com. That's OrthoCincy.com. Joining us this week is Dr. Trevor Wilkes. It's so good to have you. I want to talk about Nick Senzel, but this story caught my attention last week. Great success story. Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers, Mr. Irrelevant, charges into the postseason with San Fran, and then during the NFC title game, he injures his elbow. And this meant that he had to leave the game in the NFC title tilt against Philadelphia. He ultimately came back into the game. He threw 2 passes. He was obviously very physically compromised, and now he's going to have a procedure this offseason. But I read last week that he could have a hybrid surgery. I've never heard of this. What's a hybrid surgery?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one really in the news. I think everybody's heard of ulnar collateral or UCL injuries and Tommy John surgeries. One quick point is just that Brock Purdy's injury was an acute traumatic injury, whereas like a lot of our baseball players are wear and tear. When it's wear and tear and the ligament is not in good condition, then a reconstruction where we take a ligament from somewhere else to make a new UCL is necessary. In Brock's case, my understanding is they're hopeful that they're going to be able to fix a lot of his UCL or repair it. If they get in there and the tissue's not good, then they would add in the ligament, take it from somewhere else to replace it. And then finally, this internal brace, I think, is something a lot of us that are watching ESPN and hearing about stuff on the news. The internal brace, which is what makes it the hybrid surgery, Mo, where we're doing a repair and a reconstruction, and then we're protecting it with this internal brace. It's like a synthetic check rein that will protect the surgical site. It's actually kind of cool. It's coated with collagen, so your body heals onto it and stuff. And it's been a pretty significant new advancement in protecting some of these repairs. So hopefully the best for Brock.
When you go through this sort of procedure, as opposed to something that might be a little bit more, for lack of a better way of putting it, traditional, what is the prognosis? What's the timeline for recovery and return?
Yeah, good question. So the hope here is that we can actually speed up the timeline for return. So if you have good quality tissue and surgery goes smoothly and there's a good repair and you feel good about it, some of these athletes can begin their throwing programs as soon as 3 months after the surgery and can be back in 6 months. So that's a lot better than the traditional full reconstructions, which were, more like a year.
Let's talk about Nick Senzel, a guy who unfortunately during his professional baseball career has had to wear the label of being injury prone. Added to the long list of things he has had to deal with was a fractured big toe. He suffered it last year and then went through complications during the healing process. He required surgery. He was seen at Reds Fest riding around on a scooter, and he had a boot on. So give me an idea of what sort of complications we could be talking about when a player is trying to return from a broken toe. Yeah,
that's a good question. And I know that readers or listeners, they hear big toe and think, oh my gosh, it's just a toe. It's no big deal. But your big toe or your great toe is actually incredibly important to athletic performance. So when you're running and you're jumping, you actually get about 80% of your foot stability, foot control from your big toe. When you run and jump, about 25% of your body weight goes right through your big toe. So sometimes, Mo, if it hasn't healed just right, if the angulation of the bone's not good, if there's irritation of the ligaments and tendons under the great toe, so kind of like turf toe, another condition people have heard of, it can really affect your athletic performance, speed and agility and things like that. So great toes, while they don't sound like a big deal, they can be kind of problematic. That's kind of the story. We hope the best for him.
I can say that from the standpoint of somebody who has had to deal with a broken toe. It sounds benign. It oftentimes is not. What is the usual timeline for a broken toe to heal, when it's allowed to heal on its own versus when it requires surgery?
Yes, I mean most of the time the bone will knit together pretty solidly in 6 to 8 weeks. If they're lesser toes, smaller toes, some athletes will be back, even much faster than that. Now you throw surgery into the mix and you start looking at, more into the 3-month mark for a recovery process. Again, acknowledging that sounds like a lot for a toe, but it's really needed for athletic performance.
What is a broken toe surgery? What does that look like?
Yeah. I don't know the specifics of what Nick had, but it could be run the gamut, Mo, from correcting a bone that's healed, angled or rotated or not properly, to sometimes even repairing a tendon or ligament which might have attached to the broken fragment. So it can be any of those things.
Dr. Trevor Wilkes is with us from OrthoCincy. I want to ask you about a tweet from a former NBA coach, and I think this could apply not just to professional basketball, but across all sports. He made the observation that back in the 1990s, NBA teams had one trainer, a strength coach. They practiced more often. They practiced harder. They played more back-to-backs. In those days, especially in the early 90s, you still had teams flying commercial. Teams today have these enormous medical and performance training staffs. They value rest over practice. Load management's a big topic in that game. And yet it feels like injuries increase and games missed due to injuries have increased. And it feels like players are missing more games now than opposed to, say, 25, 30 years ago. As a sports medicine professional, what do you make of that observation?
I love this. I love this one, Mo. It's a great topic, and it has this really wonderful kind of perspective of one generation looking back on another generation, which is great. But I think it's really interesting, and I don't claim to have the right answers. I think there's 3 things I would just want to point out that I think are worth considering. One is I think we're a lot better now in sports medicine at identifying these injuries. The athletes have a lot of wearables. We're tracking everything from, their heart rate, their sleep, what's going on in the game. We use MRIs really liberally these days. So we catch a lot of bone bruises, cartilage injuries that maybe we didn't used to catch. So 1, I would say identification. 2, I think there's a lot more awareness of career longevity right now. You've got agents, you've got management teams. A lot of these guys played enormous volume of AAU in college leading up to their NBA careers. So there's a lot of people trying to help them lengthen their career. And then I think the last one that's interesting too is, while I don't know that necessarily the basketball is better than it ever was, I think everybody could agree that the athletes are bigger, more powerful, more explosive than they've ever been. And we may be running up against the limits of, some of these ligaments and tendons to withstand the pressures that these athletes put on them, kind of testing the limits of human performance. But yeah, the injury rates are up, and we certainly got to look at the prevention, the 82-game season, whatever, because, people want to see the stars play, and they always seem to be hurt.
They also make more. So if I'm an owner, if I'm a front office exec, and I've got 9 figures invested in an athlete in many, many years, I'm going to go out of my way to protect them, perhaps at the expense of the short term. Do you – because some are going to take this observation by Stan Van Gundy as the investment that professional sports teams are making in sports medicine, it's not being returned. What would you make of that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think – it would depend, Mo, on how you kind of you define return on your investment, right? Injury prevention is one piece of it, but the performance level is also higher than it's ever been. Look at the statistics of these guys coming into the NBA combines. The force production, the verticals, the speed is higher than it's ever been. But I think it's a fair criticism that probably the sports medicine departments are failing them in some regard. And I personally think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to biology and what we can do to help some of these tendons and ligaments heal as the athletes get bigger, faster, stronger. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement. It's a fair criticism.
Fantastic insight as always. I appreciate the time. We will do it again soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Mo.
Much appreciated, Dr. Trevor Wilkes from OrthoCincy. I say this all the time. The great thing about the folks at OrthoCincy, they have specialists and locations all across the tri-state. And by the way, they've got walk-in orthopedic urgent care during the week from 9 to 9 and on Saturdays from 9 to 1 in Edgewood and Eastgate. Most definitely easier than going to an ER, and I can promise you, much, much cheaper. Whenever you have an urgent orthopedic injury, go to OrthoCincy.com. That's OrthoCincy.com. Hey, it's Mo Egger. If you love college basketball as much as I do, then you will love Long Necks. The 4K TV setup is awesome, and by the way, the sound is always on for the big games. And if you tried the wings at Long Necks, you owe it to yourself. Plus, no place in Northern Kentucky has a better beer selection. There's 3 locations, Wilder, Hebron, and Ridgewood. Each one of them very easy to get to. Each one of them with a great outdoor setup for when the weather gets warmer. Long Neck Sports Grill. Stay late. Come often.